The first thing I felt when I squeezed her throat was a strange relief, as if years of pain were draining through my fingers. Vanessa's eyes, the same eyes that had watched me get beaten on the sidewalk, were now begging for air. I don't know how long it lasted, maybe seconds, maybe an eternity. All I know is that when I finished, silence was the only witness to what I had done to avenge my mom. Some say I'm a monster, but you don't know the whole story, and believe me, nothing is as simple as it seems. My name is Michael. I'm 19 now. I spent the last 2 years in a juvenile detention center. I got out exactly 3 months and 11 days ago. The clock hasn't stopped ticking since I regained my freedom, but my mind is still trapped in that day. The day I decided my cousin Vanessa didn't deserve to keep breathing after what she did to my mom. You've probably heard about me in the news. Teen kidnaps and kills own cousin. Those sensationalist headlines never tell the whole story, do they? They never talk about the years of torment, about how my family was a minefield, about how Vanessa turned my life into hell. And most importantly, they never mention that she was responsible for the death of the only person keeping me sane in this world. I'm not asking for absolution for what I did. I know that taking a life is something I'll carry forever. But before judging me, before deciding I'm just another criminal, I want you to hear my version. The version that never made it to the news, that remained buried in police reports and sessions with psychologists at the detention center. When I'm done telling this story, you can decide if I'm a monster or just someone who was pushed beyond the limits of what's bearable. Maybe you'll never fully understand. Maybe I'll never understand why things had to reach this point. If you're really paying attention to me, if you're actually willing to hear the entire story before forming an opinion, please like this video now, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell for new stories like mine, and comment where you're watching from. It might seem silly, but knowing that someone's really listening means a lot to someone who's been silenced for so long. What I'm about to reveal will completely change how you see this story, I promise. But I should warn you, it's not a happy story. And the ending? Well, you already know how it ended for Vanessa, but you don't know how it began for me. I grew up in Newport Heights, a middle-class neighborhood on the outskirts of town. Our house wasn't big, but it was decent. We had enough to live on, though never with anything extra. My dad, Richard, worked as a manager at a hardware store. My mom, Claire, was a math teacher at a public school. We had an ordinary life, or at least that's how it seemed on the surface. Until I was 6, I have memories of normal moments. Chocolate birthday cakes, Sunday trips to the park, my mom helping me with homework at the kitchen table. Common things, you know. But even in these memories, I can now see signs I didn't understand at the time. My father was always a man of few words. No, I correct myself. He was a man whose words were carefully chosen to hurt. He didn't yell. That would have been too obvious. He distilled poison in short phrases, seemingly harmless comments that corroded my mother's self-esteem day by day. That dress doesn't flatter you, Claire. This rice is bland as usual. You still haven't taught the boy to read properly? My mother was different. Claire had a sparkle in her eyes that not even my father could completely extinguish. She was affectionate with me, protected me as best she could, but there was something about her I couldn't understand until I was older. She lived in her own world sometimes, lost in thought, with exaggerated reactions to everyday situations. The doctors later called it bipolar disorder, but at the time I just knew my mom was special, as she used to say herself. Michael, people like us see the world in different colors, she'd explain during her euphoric moments, painting my bedroom walls at 3 a.m., or when she'd spend days in bed, curtains drawn, unable to get up to make breakfast. I learned to make scrambled eggs when I was 8 because I needed to eat something before school. There was also my Aunt Rebecca, my mom's sister. She would show up sporadically, usually when my mom was in her difficult phases, as we called them. Aunt Rebecca was the opposite of Claire. Practical, down to earth, always criticizing my mother's irresponsible behavior. And there was Vanessa, my cousin, Rebecca's daughter. Vanessa was the same age as me. When we were little, we got along well. We built pillow forts in the living room, traded baseball cards, shared secrets. She was the only kid I could share the burden of living in a dysfunctional family with. My mom yells a lot too, she confided in me once when we were 9. That was our connection, understanding that our families weren't like those in cereal commercials. Things started to change when we turned 12. That's when Aunt Rebecca divorced Vanessa's dad, and our family dynamic completely transformed. Aunt Rebecca's visits became more frequent, always accompanied by Vanessa. But my cousin wasn't the same anymore. Vanessa started hanging out with a group of older teenagers from the neighboring district. She changed the way she dressed, the way she talked. By 13, she was coming home smelling of cigarettes. At 14, my aunt found a joint in her backpack. It was around this time that she started dating Marcus. Marcus was 18 when Vanessa was just 14. He had already been detained for petty thefts, hung out with a rough crowd, and had tattoos indicating involvement with a local gang. Aunt Rebecca tried to forbid the relationship, but that only made Vanessa grow closer to him. It was during this time that Vanessa also began to change her attitude toward me. The complicit smiles turned into looks of contempt. Shared secrets became ammunition for humiliation. "Hey, Michael, remember when you cried because your dad broke your toy car? What a baby," she'd say in front of her friends. At home, things were also getting worse. My mom's episodes were becoming more intense. There were weeks of euphoria when she redecorated the entire house, spending money we didn't have on paint and new furniture. My father responded with calculated coldness, cutting off her credit cards, threatening to have her committed. Then came the crashes, periods when she could barely get out of bed. Despite all this, the bond between my mom and me remained strong. During her good phases, she was the most amazing mom in the world. Creative, loving, full of plans. She taught me math in ways that made perfect sense. She invented games, told me stories. "We're partners against the world, Michael," she'd say, squeezing my hand. And we were. At 15, I tried to talk to the school counselor about what was happening at home. The woman listened for 5 minutes, made some notes, and said she would contact my parents. A week later, my father showed up at the parent-teacher conference, all smiles, explaining that my mother had a small condition that was under medical control and that I was going through a difficult phase, making up stories to get attention. No one questioned it. No one checked. The counselor never called me in to talk again. That's when I understood I was alone in this. And it was exactly when I felt most isolated that hell really began. Vanessa, who now spent almost all her time with Marcus and his friends, decided I would be her new target for amusement. It started with small provocations at school. Vanessa and her friends called me Crazy Lady's son. They mimicked my mom during her euphoric moments. They spread rumors that I took the same medication she did. I tried to ignore it, but the insults became more personal, more cruel. Vanessa knew all my weak spots. She knew about the nights I cried hidden in the bathroom after hearing another fight between my parents. She knew about my fear of ending up committed like my mother was threatened to be. Sometimes she used it all against me. "Hey, cousin, have you chosen which mental hospital you'll check into when you go crazy like your mom?" She'd yell in the school hallway, making everyone laugh. I would swallow my tears, lower my head, and keep walking. What else could I do? At 16, things got drastically worse. Marcus, Vanessa's boyfriend, was now 20 and increasingly involved in criminal activities. He led a small group that controlled drug dealing in several blocks of our neighborhood. Vanessa bragged about this, as if dating a drug dealer was something to be proud of. One Wednesday afternoon, coming back from the library, I felt someone following me. It was Marcus and 2 of his friends, Kevin and Diego. I tried to walk faster, but they caught up with me at the entrance to an alley. "Well, if it isn't Vanessa's little cousin," Marcus said, blocking my way. "She told me you've been looking at her in a weird way. Is that true?" I was confused. "What are you talking about? She's my cousin." "Don't play dumb," Kevin said, pushing me against the wall. "Vanessa told us you try to spy on her in the bathroom, that you keep texting her saying she's hot." It was a complete lie. Absurd. Vanessa was my cousin. We practically grew up like siblings. I would never have any interest in her like that. Besides, I could barely look her in the eye since she started humiliating me. "That's a lie," I protested. "Ask Aunt Rebecca. We barely talk anymore." The first punch came without warning. It hit my stomach, making all the air leave my lungs. I fell to my knees, trying to breathe. The kicks came next, to my ribs, legs, back. I tried to protect myself, curling into a fetal position. "This is just a warning," I heard Marcus say between kicks. "If I hear you looked at her again, you'll go to the hospital in a bag." I don't know how long it lasted. Maybe 2 minutes, maybe 10. When they finally stopped, I could see from the corner of my eye Vanessa standing at the entrance of the alley, watching everything. There was no shock or concern on her face, just a slight, satisfied smile. I lay there for almost an hour, until I could gather the strength to get up. I arrived home covered in blood and bruises. My mom was having one of her good days and panicked when she saw me. My father was away on a business trip, which was a relief. "Michael, my God, who did this to you?" she asked, helping me sit on the couch, running to get ice and antiseptic. "I fell down the stairs at school," I lied. I didn't want to involve her in this. I didn't want her to confront Aunt Rebecca or Vanessa. I knew it would only make things worse. She didn't believe me, of course. Claire might have had her problems, but she wasn't stupid. "Michael, look into my eyes. Who did this to you?" I ended up telling her everything about Vanessa's provocations, about Marcus and his friends, about the lie she made up. My mother listened in silence, her eyes filling with a rage I rarely saw. "Tomorrow I'm going to talk to Rebecca," she said. "This won't stand." "No, Mom," I begged. "It will make everything worse. They'll come back. They'll get me again." "Nobody touches my son like this," she replied determinedly. "Rebecca needs to control that daughter of hers before it's too late." The next day, my mother called Aunt Rebecca and demanded a conversation. They arranged to meet at our house that late afternoon. I asked to stay in my room. I didn't want to see Vanessa. My mother agreed. From my window, I saw Aunt Rebecca arrive alone. Better that way. At first, I only heard murmurs coming from the living room, but soon the voices began to rise. "Your daughter is completely out of control, Rebecca," my mother shouted. "Look what that criminal boyfriend of hers did to Michael." "Don't call my daughter's boyfriend a criminal," Aunt Rebecca shot back. "I'm sure there are two sides to this story." "Two sides? Two sides?" My mother's voice went up an octave. "Michael came home covered in bruises. 3 grown men beat up a 16-year-old boy. Maybe your son provoked it somehow," Aunt Rebecca suggested, her voice cold. "Vanessa told me he's been acting strange around her." "Are you insane? Michael would never do something like that." "Your daughter is lying, Rebecca. She's putting my son in danger." "Look who's talking about insanity," Aunt Rebecca responded with venom in her voice. "The woman who needs pills to function like a normal person, wanting to lecture me about how to raise my daughter." It was as if someone had thrown gasoline on a fire. What followed was the worst fight I'd ever heard between them. My mother shouted that Aunt Rebecca had always been jealous of her, even with her problems, that Rebecca never knew how to be a mother, that she was raising a sociopath. Aunt Rebecca retaliated, saying my mother was unstable, that I probably had problems too. "The apple doesn't fall far from the tree." I covered my ears with the pillow, but I could still hear them. When the front door slammed hard, indicating that Aunt Rebecca had left, I went downstairs. I found my mother sitting on the couch, shaking with anger. "This family is dead to us," she declared when she saw me. "I never want to see Rebecca or that daughter of hers under this roof again." In the days that followed, I avoided Vanessa at school. I changed corridors when I saw her. I ate my lunch in different places, but I could feel her hate-filled stares. On the 3rd day after the fight, she cornered me in the bathroom. "You shouldn't have involved your mom in this, little cousin," she hissed. "Now she and my mom aren't speaking anymore, and it's all your fault." "You lied to your boyfriend?" I replied, trying to seem braver than I felt. "Told him I was hitting on you." "Why, Vanessa? What did I do to you?" She laughed, a joyless sound. "Because I can. Because it's fun to watch you cringe in fear. Because you and your crazy mother deserve to suffer." "Why so much hate?" I asked, genuinely confused. Her face contorted. "Because you were always the poor little things, the special ones. Poor Claire with her illness. Poor Michael who has to take care of his mom. My mom always put you on a pedestal, even with all your problems. And I was never good enough." I left without responding. I had never noticed this resentment. To me, Aunt Rebecca had always seemed to criticize my mother, not admire her. But Vanessa's mind had distorted everything, creating a narrative where she was the victim. The following weeks were tense but calm. Vanessa avoided me, and I avoided her. My mom and Aunt Rebecca weren't speaking. At home, my mother seemed more stable, taking her medication regularly, making a visible effort to stay balanced. It was on a Friday, almost a month after the fight, that everything completely fell apart. My mother taught in the afternoon. She usually arrived home around 6:30 p.m. At 7, I started to worry. At 8, I called her cell phone several times with no answer. At 9, I was about to go out looking for her when the doorbell rang. It was 2 police officers, a man and a woman with grave expressions. "Are you Michael Alvarez?" the officer asked. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "Son, we need you to come with us to the station. There's been an incident involving your mother." The body of Claire Alvarez was found in a vacant lot 3 blocks from the school where she taught. According to the police report I read months later, she had been violently assaulted, suffered multiple blows to the head and torso. The cause of death: traumatic brain injury. Her belongings, purse, cell phone, wedding ring, weren't taken, which ruled out robbery as a motive. That night at the police station, sitting in a chair that was too hard with a mug of watery coffee I couldn't drink, I heard the investigator talk about crimes of passion and investigating the husband. My father was in another city on business with dozens of witnesses. His alibi was perfect. The days that followed were a blur of cruel formalities. Identifying the body, answering the same questions repeatedly, planning a funeral, receiving condolences from people we barely knew. My father returned, took control of the situation with a cold efficiency that disgusted me. He seemed more bothered by the inconvenience than devastated by the loss. It was at the wake that I noticed the absence of Aunt Rebecca and Vanessa. None of my mother's family showed up. Had the fight been that serious, to the point they wouldn't even come to say their final goodbyes? 2 weeks later, with still no clues about who had killed my mother, I returned to school. The pitying looks were almost as unbearable as the whispers when I passed by. "That's the son of the teacher who was murdered." It was in the cafeteria while I was eating alone that I heard it. I wasn't supposed to hear, I'm sure. 2 girls from Vanessa's circle of friends sitting a few tables away, speaking louder than they should have. And Vanessa said that Marcus solved the problem for her once and for all. That crazy aunt will never bother her again. Seriously? She didn't say it directly, but she implied it, you know. Said that after the big fight between her mom and her aunt, she asked Marcus to scare her. And then, well, you know what happened. Man, that's way too heavy. I can't believe he did this just because Vanessa asked. You don't know Marcus. He'll do anything Vanessa asks. He's obsessed with her. The world stopped spinning at that moment. The voices became distant, as if I were underwater. My vision darkened around the edges. My mom had been murdered because Vanessa asked Marcus to scare her. I don't know how I finished the school day. I don't know how I got home. I don't know how I managed to look at my father's face and pretend nothing had changed, but inside me, something had broken irreparably. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, a single question echoing in my mind. What would I do with this information? I thought about going to the police, but what did I have? A fragment of conversation overheard by chance. Nothing that could be used as evidence. It would be my word against Vanessa's, and she would certainly deny everything. In the days that followed, I began to observe Vanessa at school. She seemed normal, laughing with her friends, exchanging kisses with Marcus in the hallways, complaining about tests. How could someone who orchestrated her own aunt's death act so normally? It was a week later that I made my decision. It wouldn't be through the justice system that my mother would be avenged. It would have to be by my own hands. The plan began to form slowly. First, I needed to confirm what I had heard. I created a fake social media profile pretending to be a new girl at school and managed to get close virtually to one of Vanessa's friends. After a few days of casual conversation, I mentioned that I had heard rumors about a girl named Vanessa's boyfriend getting rid of someone. You mean the teacher? Look, I shouldn't be telling you this, but everyone knows anyway. It was Marcus and some friends of his who did the job at Vanessa's request. She told me herself, all proud. Said her aunt deserved it for humiliating her mom. Heavy, right? I had my confirmation. The anger I felt was so intense that I vomited as soon as I ended the conversation. My mother, who despite all her problems only wanted to protect me, dead because she confronted Rebecca and Vanessa about the assault I suffered. The next step was to study Vanessa's routine. I discovered that she attended an English course on Tuesdays and Thursdays, leaving alone around 9:30 p.m. The place was just 2 blocks from my house, on a street with little traffic in the evening. I got an old van from a neighbor, Mr. Johnson, with the excuse that I needed to transport some furniture. I was near the English school on a Tuesday, the engine off, waiting. When Vanessa came out, she was alone and distracted by her phone. I approached from behind, placed the cloth with chloroform over her face. Yes, I had researched how to do this, stolen chemicals from the school lab. She struggled for a few seconds before passing out. I quickly put her in the back of the van and drove to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town that I had discovered during my research. The place was perfect. Isolated, no neighbors nearby, walls thick enough to muffle sounds. I tied Vanessa to a chair and waited for her to wake up. When she opened her eyes, the initial fear turned into shock upon recognizing me. "Michael, what's happening? Where are we?" "Hello, cousin," I replied, my voice calmer than I ever imagined it would be in this situation. "We have a lot to talk about." The next hours were a blur of confessions. At first, Vanessa denied everything. Then she tried to minimize her involvement. I only asked him to scare her, not kill her. It wasn't my fault. But eventually, perhaps realizing the gravity of the situation, she confessed everything. How she had asked Marcus to teach my mother a lesson after the fight, how he and his friends approached her as she was leaving school, how things got out of control when my mother resisted and tried to fight back. "It was an accident, Michael. I swear I didn't want her to die. I just wanted her to be scared, to know she couldn't talk to my mom that way." I listened to everything in silence. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to find a justification not to do what I had planned. But then I remembered my mother, her broken body in the morgue, the marks of violence that indicated it hadn't been a simple accident. "You know what's saddest about all this, Vanessa? We were friends, we grew up together. You were like a sister to me." "We can be again, Michael," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "Let's forget all this. I can tell the truth to the police. I can say it was Marcus, that I had nothing to do with it." "Now you want to blame just your boyfriend?" I asked, "after confessing that you asked him to attack my mother?" "Please, Michael," she cried. "I'm only 17. I have my whole life ahead of me. Your mother wouldn't want you to do this." It was the mention of my mother that made me lose control. "Don't talk about her. You have no right to say what my mother would want." What happened next was as if I were watching the scene from outside my body. I saw my hands move to Vanessa's neck. I felt the pressure of my fingers against her trachea. I heard her desperate gasps for air. I don't know how long it lasted. Maybe seconds, maybe minutes. I just know that when I came to, Vanessa was motionless. Her eyes open, fixed on nothing, and an absolute silence took over the warehouse. I remember having vomited afterward, having cried until my eyes burned, having talked to Vanessa's body, apologizing not for the act itself, but for us having reached that point. I didn't try to hide the crime, didn't run. I sat on the floor of that warehouse and called the police. "I want to report a homicide," I said when they answered. "I killed my cousin Vanessa Cordero. I'm at the abandoned warehouse of the old textile factory on Rural Road number 7. When the patrol cars arrived, I was still there, sitting next to the body. I didn't resist arrest. I didn't try to make excuses or justifications. I confessed everything, the kidnapping, the interrogation, the strangling. The only thing I made sure to make clear was the motivation. Vanessa had orchestrated my mother's murder. The investigators initially doubted, but when I mentioned names, dates, specific details that could only have come from Vanessa, they began to investigate more thoroughly. They eventually gathered evidence linking Marcus and his friends to my mother's murder. Text messages, witnesses who had seen them near the school that night, and finally, the confession of Kevin, one of Marcus's friends who participated in the crime but couldn't handle the pressure of interrogation. I was tried as a minor since I was 16 at the time. My trial made headlines in all the local newspapers. Teen kills cousin after discovering she orchestrated mother's murder. Some people called me a monster, others a victim of circumstances. The truth is, I was both. I was sentenced to 2 years in a juvenile detention center with mandatory psychological counseling. My father didn't show up for the trial. I later found out he had moved to another city, restarted his life as if I had never existed. Marcus got 25 years for aggravated homicide. His friends, Kevin and Diego, got 18 each as accomplices. Aunt Rebecca had a nervous breakdown when she learned everything and spent months in a psychiatric clinic. Sometimes I wonder if she really didn't know anything or if she just chose not to see the monster she had raised. In the detention center, I had a lot of time to think, to relive every moment, every decision that led me there. Could it have been different? If I had gone directly to the police with my suspicions, would Vanessa be alive today? If my mother hadn't confronted Aunt Rebecca, would she still be here with me? These are questions without answers, and perhaps it's better that way. The 2 years I spent in the juvenile detention center were surprisingly not the worst of my life. There was a routine, clear rules, defined expectations, things I never had at home. 3 meals a day, regular classes, weekly therapy sessions. Dr. Henry, my psychologist at the center, was the first adult who really listened to me, not to judge or advise, just to understand. In our sessions, I unearthed memories I had repressed. My mother's first crises when I was only 5, the times my father threatened to commit her if she didn't behave, the pitying looks from neighbors when I went alone to buy bread in the morning because no one else at home could get up. "You grew up being the adult in the house, Michael," Dr. Henry told me once. "You took on responsibilities that weren't yours, worries that no child should have." Gradually, I began to understand the patterns that repeated in our family. How my mother's inadequately treated bipolar disorder affected our family dynamics. How my father, unable to handle the situation, resorted to coldness and emotional distance as a defense mechanism. How Vanessa, growing up in this toxic environment between the two sisters, developed her own traumas and distortions. "This doesn't justify what she did," Dr. Henry always emphasized, "nor what you did. Understanding is not excusing." During my time there, I received only 2 visits. One from Mrs. Lewis, my high school English teacher, who had always been kind to me and was horrified to learn what had happened. The other, surprisingly, was from Aunt Rebecca, almost a year after my detention. That meeting was strange, tense, laden with unspoken emotions. She had aged years in just a few months, her hair now completely gray, her face marked by deep wrinkles. "I came to tell you that I don't hate you, Michael," were her first words after sitting across from me in the visiting room. "I should, but I can't, because I know I failed as a mother. Failed to see what Vanessa was becoming. Failed to protect my own sister." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream, blame her for everything. Another part recognized the genuine pain in her eyes, the same pain I saw in the mirror every day. "Marcus confessed everything," she continued after a long silence. How Vanessa manipulated him and his friends into attacking Claire. How she planned everything after the fight we had. How he never intended to kill, but things got out of control. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you deserve to know the complete truth, and because I need to say out loud the monstrosity my daughter committed." She took a deep breath, her hands trembling on the table. "And I also need to apologize for not believing you when you said you were assaulted, for automatically taking Vanessa's side. Maybe if I had listened, none of this would have happened. I didn't forgive Aunt Rebecca that day, nor in the days that followed. But I began to understand that forgiveness isn't something you give to others. It's something you give to yourself. I left the center 3 months ago. Now, at 19, I'm trying to rebuild some kind of life. I live in a small, subsidized apartment for vulnerable youth. I work part-time at a bookstore, and am studying to finish high school through an equivalency program. It's not much, but it's a start. Sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I still see Vanessa's face in her final moments. I still feel the weight of my mother's body when I hugged her for the last time at the wake. I still hear the words of the sentence being read by the judge. The nightmares are less frequent now, but they haven't completely disappeared. Dr. Henry says they probably never will completely, that I'll carry the weight of my actions for the rest of my life, that the real punishment isn't the years of detention, but living with the consequences of your own choices. He's right, of course. I come to this park almost every day. I sit on this same bench, watch people passing by, living their normal lives, and wonder if I'll ever have that again. Normalcy, peace, the feeling of belonging somewhere, to someone. I don't know if I deserve it. I don't know if it's possible. I took someone's life. The fact that this person had caused immense pain to my family doesn't change that. I crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. I made a choice that redefined who I am forever. Was it justifiable? Some would say yes, that anyone in my place would have done the same. Others would say no, that I should have trusted the justice system, as flawed as it might be. The truth is, I don't have an answer. On my good days, I think that maybe some good came out of all this. Marcus and his friends were arrested. They can't hurt other people anymore. On my bad days, I can only think of the lives destroyed, including my own. Dr. Henry always reminds me that I have a choice now. Let this tragedy define me completely, or use it as a starting point to build something new. You can't change the past, Michael, he says, but you can choose what kind of person you want to be from now on. I'm trying day by day, sometimes stumbling, sometimes moving forward. If you've made it this far and really understood everything I went through, please like this video right now. Subscribe to the Traumatic Accounts channel, hit the notification bell to know when new testimonials are posted, and comment what time it is where you're watching this. It seems like a simple request, but for someone like me, who lost everything and everyone, knowing there are people really listening means more than you can imagine. I'm not asking for absolution or understanding. Just a moment of reflection on how our choices, even small ones, can trigger consequences we never imagined. On how dysfunctional families can create cycles of trauma that perpetuate for generations. On how sometimes the real monsters aren't those who committed the most terrible acts, but those who created the conditions for those acts to seem inevitable. My name is Michael. I'm 19. I killed my cousin after she orchestrated my mother's murder. This is my story, and it doesn't have a happy ending. The end.